A law passed during the 2023 legislative session created confusion among law enforcement and school officials, resulting in some school resource officers being pulled from schools. Now that the legislature is back in session, lawmakers are working to clarify the law. Joining me is the person who initially flagged some concerns with the law change, the lead Republican of the Senate Education Policy Committee, Senator Zach Duckworth. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
The law change last session grew out of a 2015 law that prohibited prone restraints from being used on students with disabilities. The new law extended that prohibition to all students. Generally speaking, what is the problem with this law as you see it?
Sure. First off, I appreciate the question. Obviously, it's a very topic at the Capitol right now. It's getting a lot of attention, and people have a lot of questions about it. The law that passed in regards to our special education students was a no-brainer, right? We want to protect those kids. We want to protect all kids, but there also has to be a balance between our need to protect children and also keep them and our schools safe in general. And school resource officers play a large part in that in the schools that they're in. The law that was passed last year, I think just about everybody now admits, has a lack of clarity. It's ambiguous. I think even one of the DFL representatives, who happens to be a prosecutor, admitted during their hearing that it's confusing and needs clarification. So that's really the issue at hand here. How do we bring clarity to the law that was passed last year that allows school resource officers to keep our kids, our teachers, and schools safe? That's all we're trying to do.
You are the chief author of 4 bills on this issue. One simply repeals the changes that were enacted. 2 of the bills deal with exemptions then for various types of law enforcement. So law enforcement peace officers or school resource officers or officers who are contracted by the district. Essentially, only those law enforcement people would be used to use of force restraints, and everyone else is prohibited. Are there instances then when law enforcement must be able to utilize these restraints?
Yeah, without question. I think without question. And the reason, I still think a full repeal is the best option. I think we could all just click a reset button, erase what was passed, and start over. It doesn't mean that we have to end the conversation about school resource officers and how they should be acting safely in schools. But I think we owe it to school districts and students and communities right now a quick solution that they're asking for. That would be a repealer. And then we can have conversations about a few of the other bills that I dropped. And I did that to show people there are all sorts of different options and things that we could consider regarding this. So let's at least have the conversation. Let's do it transparently in front of the public and get feedback from stakeholders to make sure we get the best possible outcome. I think there are unfortunately incidences, and they're on the rise in schools right now, where students, teachers, staff are placed in danger. They're placed in harm's way, and those school resource officers have to have the authority and the discretion they need to prevent people from being harmed. That's really all we're talking about. And the law that was passed caused so much confusion that police officers and school districts and cities weren't sure, well, can we step in and stop this fight yet? Or do we have to wait for someone to get hurt or almost be hurt before we can actually intervene? That's what we need to stop and solve.
The 4th bill is broader. It continues to exempt school resource officers. It removes the word imminent from imminent bodily harm. It allows restraint to be used to prevent, quote, bodily harm or death to the child or another. And it requires the completion of a standardized school resource officer course of study. Does this represent fully the changes that you think are necessary if there is not a repeal?
So that bill is a step toward showing our colleagues across the aisle that we are very much open to a conversation, right? Let's allow police officers, school resource officers the discretion they need to keep people safe, but we're also open to having that conversation about other protocols or standards that we want to put in place regarding school resource officers and what they're able to do in schools, or how we'd like them to be conducting themselves in our schools. It is not the goal of Republicans to just allow school resource officers to have a blank check in our schools to do whatever they want, nor do school resource officers want that. Nobody wants that. Our goal is to say, how do we ensure they're there to keep people safe, prevent and deter harm from happening, and then also, if there are concerns that we need to address regarding the community and other stakeholders, let's have that conversation. But let's do it as a group together in a way that's not going to have unintended consequences, like school resource officers being pulled out of buildings, which we had happen before the start of the school year.
Senator Bonnie Westland is the person carrying the bill that is currently moving in the Senate. That there was, hearing in the Education Policy Committee last week, and there was some robust discussion on the bill. In what ways is Senator Westland's bill not satisfactory to you?
So, in my opinion, I think in the opinion of many others, there is it doesn't solve some of the clarity issue that exists in the bill. Meaning, it's still there's still room for improvement in allowing and making sure that it's very clear in the law that school resource officers have discretion. There's a couple of words in there. There's may versus shall. That needs to be addressed. Law enforcement, school resource officers need to be able to have the discretion to intervene to stop, prevent, or deter people from being hurt. Right now, that language is still in the bill. It needs to be fixed. There's also conversation regarding model policy and which groups of people will be involved in the process of shaping that policy. I think folks have concern about that. As a legislator, I do too. I don't think we should abdicate our responsibility as a state legislature. That's probably a decision that we should be making and crafting. Let's not pass the buck and put it to another group to decide. Let's do it right here, right now, so that people know what we're working on and law enforcement knows what they can expect regarding the law.
It must be noted that schools are not required to have school resource officers. In fact, a 2014 Department of Public Safety survey, which was then cited in a 2021 House research memo, so because I know it's old, but at least in 2014, only 28% of Minnesota schools were served by school resource officers. Obviously, that may have changed by now. But what value do school resource officers bring to schools as a former school board member and somebody who's advocating about this?
Well, I appreciate what you said at the beginning of that question. I think there are really two things that we all need to remember as it relates to this issue. The first one is what you mentioned. Schools don't have to have school resource officers. So if there's truly an issue, a community, a school board, a school district could decide, hey, we're just not comfortable having school resource officers. Great, that's a decision that you can make at your level. We don't need to force everybody, all school districts across the state, to fit one universal mandate regarding school resource officers. Number two is this. The Minnesota Department of Education conducted a survey of Minnesota students. 94% of those who responded on the survey said they like and see value in having a school resource officer present in the building. So what's their value? It's invaluable. There's the safety component, there's the relationship building component, there's the first contact component. The school resource officers, the stories we hear from families, from students, from the districts, they would melt your heart. They are doing great work out there among youth, a lot of it under the radar that people don't know of, and for us to pass a law that has an unintended consequence that disrupts that is extremely damaging and something that it's our responsibility to correct and correct it immediately.
Now, education is very important to you, and so since I've got you here in the hot seat, I wanted to touch on one more topic. During the 2023 legislative session, you lobbied for legislation that would ensure that all Minnesota kids learn to read, following principles focused on the science of reading. The legislature did ultimately pass a measure called the READ Act, which will require schools to adopt a new reading curriculum. But you have dropped a bill that would amend the READ Act. What are you trying to amend? What would you like to see?
I appreciate the question. I think the good news is there was a bipartisan effort last year in regard to literacy efforts and the science of reading, and that being a part of the instruction in our schools. We're talking about phonics, sounding out words, as well as having that be a part of the instruction that future teachers would get or current teachers would get. Some of the aspects of the bill that maybe were a little bit out of our control were some of the mandated timelines and some of the mandates regarding curriculum. So what I would like to do, I think you are going to see a bill that's a revision to the READ Act. You might see a couple different versions, but really it's going to help school districts and either give them more time to adopt curriculum and or broaden the scope or the options that they can that would meet the definition of the curriculum that's allowed. Really, we're just trying to help schools implement this mandate so we can help as many kids as possible. That's the purpose behind it.
Senator Zach Duckworth, it is always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.